Welcome to the Focal Insights Podcast Founder Hour edition, hosted by co-founder Joe Pollock. Joe has been in the e-commerce industry for over 25 years. He grew and bootstrapped his own startup to a successful exit. Founder Hour episodes go behind the scenes to learn how some of the best e-commerce brands were founded, grown, and operated straight from the founders themselves. Founder Hour is brought to you by Focal Software, a new generation ERP and operation suite for e-commerce brands and third-party marketplace sellers. Focal was built with SMB brands and marketplace sellers in mind to help them grow profitably. Now let's welcome our host, Joe Pollock.
Hello and welcome to the Focal E-commerce Insights podcast, where we chat with e-commerce entrepreneurs about business, selling online, and how to overcome challenges for success. Joining us today is Braiden Day. Braiden has a bachelor's degree in business management and entrepreneurship from BYU. In 2019, Braiden became the CEO of Odion Menswear. Odion acquired Railtech in May of 2024, and Railtech is an e-commerce company that specializes in men's belts. He helped increase the company locations from 1 to 4 in 2 years and increase revenue from $700,000 to $1.5 million, or more than doubling revenue in less than 3 years. Braiden is currently selling in brick and mortar locations and e-commerce through their Shopify website. He has 4 children, 3 of them are triplets, and he lives in Provo, Utah. Braiden, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be on.
Absolutely. Thank you. So when I speak with business owners, one thing that's consistent is that they all want to go out and create their own business. And so they set out to do it, but then things start to turn a little bit different when I hear their stories from that point forward, because most people have in mind that they want to get something going, they want to have their own business, and they have the destination in mind, but they don't always know the path that it's going to take. So those are the fascinating stories, how you got to where you are today and how you started, and maybe a little bit about what happened along the way. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that story?
Yeah, something about the story with Odion Menswear is we actually were in business a few years before I started at the company. And I actually just started as a sales associate in one of our brick and mortar stores. And I worked my way up. There was a couple lucky breaks I got and got into a spot where I could take over. But along the way, one of the things is you take on a company that's already going. There are some visions that are already there, but then you have to come up with your own visions and look for different things. And one thing that was consistent was as we grew, cash flow became more difficult. And so that's been something that has been one of our biggest obstacles to overcome is cash flow. As you grow, you think that it would obviously it would just solve itself with more sales, but it does obviously come with difficulties in terms of cash flow. So that's been one of our biggest obstacles in trying to find different ways. And that was one of the reasons for our expansion to more brick and mortar stores, because we do a lot of brick and mortar, and e-commerce are so much better than our revenues and margins on wholesale. So we actually do wholesale to quite a few different people also. So we have our own clothing lines. And so we have about 10 big business customers that wholesale to us. And so we wanted to expand our retail operations and our both retail and e-commerce. And so that was our big move. That was where we went from the 1 location to 4 locations, was because we saw, hey, we need to increase our higher margin sales to get us into a spot where we can cash flow this situation better. So that's really shaped where we've moved over the last few years. And so that's been one of the biggest challenges, and still finding solutions for that has been extremely difficult. So one of the things on like a software side that we've struggled with is when you have brick and mortar and e-commerce, trying to find ways to track from marketing to actual conversion has been really difficult. On the e-commerce side, that's pretty easy. Obviously, there are so many tools built into, if you put a meta ad out, there's lots of tracking softwares and ways that it tracks to go through. With Shopify is what we use to be able to attribute those sales. But brick and mortar is a lot more difficult. So a lot of times with us, so we are a menswear company, so we sell suits. Suits is a really difficult thing to sell online. We do have lots of other items in store that we can sell, other items that can sell in store and online, like shirts, belts, ties, socks, all those types of things can sell online. So one thing we notice with our business is a lot of time our e-commerce customers are repeat customers. So we have to get them in the store the first time. And once they're in the store the first time, they get to buy a suit from us, buy some of those other products. We can get them to repeat and come back in as e-commerce customers. But to be able to track the marketing from a meta ad, let's say, to in-store and actually know that it was attributed to that specific ad is almost impossible. So that actually is the software we're still trying to find a full solution to that, to be able to track that. There's lots of workarounds we've worked with on that, but honestly, that transition and trying to figure out how to attribute our marketing has been one of probably my biggest obstacles over the last couple of years, is to increase those revenue spots where we need to. That's been a really difficult thing for us. And then obviously on the suit side, like I mentioned, it's so hard to sell suits online. So we are still working on finding ways to improve that situation. Menswear in general has a higher return rate than a normal clothing company, but then suits, it's extremely high compared to the average. So those are the challenges that we're still working on and trying to solve now.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks for sharing all that. Let's get into the technology side a little bit in a minute, because one of the things when you talk about businesses, running them, starting them, you hit on something that is pretty consistent, which is cash flow when you're in a growth mode. So you did mention, though, that I think you said you felt like the sales would take care of that, but there was something else that put the pressure on. So was that adding employees, or was it the locations, or what was the expenses that, even though you were growing and selling, you were still in a cash crunch?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And one thing I think on the clothing side of retail and anything where you have to carry hard inventory, is that's been our biggest cash difficulty. So as you grow, you have to get more inventory and you have to house that inventory. And a lot of times when we were growing and we could do smaller orders from certain vendors, now our vendors decided that it was all coming together during COVID, and just in the general sense of where we were building as a business, our vendors, instead of being able to hold the inventory and finance that inventory, we all of a sudden needed to start housing it and financing it. And then COVID made it even worse by saying, now we not only do we have to finance it once it comes in, we need to finance it with a deposit months before we actually ever get that product. And so that transition for us was a really big part of that cash flow crunch, was just housing inventory. So yes, expanding those stores and opening that up did obviously not help the cash flow in some ways, but it definitely, the biggest or cash crunch was the inventory. And you would think that as you sell it and you get more of it, it would take care of itself, like I mentioned earlier. But the more you have to take in, the more it costs, and the longer the holding costs are, and all those different costs of capital were difficult for us.
Yeah. So you had the assets, you didn't have any problem with the money. They were just all tied up in product. A lot of nice clothing hanging on hangers, but you had to keep moving that stuff. So how did you find any solution to move product more quickly, or what was the way that you got out of that, if you want to call it a bind?
Yeah. So there's been lots of different ways. We've had to find different revenue streams to be able to, that's one of the reasons, like, for the expansion and trying to accelerate those, we've had to cut product lines that maybe weren't as fast moving as we were hoping they were. So we've had to bear down on what are the most important SKUs for us that can go move through. That's another thing about menswear that's difficult, is the SKUs, to be able to have sizes. Like in a suit, you have, let's just say 10, I'm off the top of my head, I think it's right around 10 sizes, but then within those sizes, you need a long, you need a short. And so all of a sudden now that becomes 30 just in one color of suit. So then all of a sudden you start adding up those SKUs and it just becomes really large. How you have to have enough backstock for those. And so trying to cut out as many SKUs as possible, taking, like in our shirts, we've had to cut out SKUs and more go to a sport sizing. So like small, medium, large, extra large. And that's been huge for us to get out of that by cutting SKUs that weren't necessary, that still kept our business in a spot where it didn't decrease our sales, but it decreased our overhead.
Yeah, I can see how you could have what would look on the surface like one suit, but with the different sizes, that could be, I think you mentioned a number there, but what is it in reality for you?
I think it's right around 30 per color. So all of a sudden now you go 6, 7 colors, and now you're looking at the number just grows really quick.
So you have one suit that's really like 100 different products. Yeah. Okay. We talked briefly when we spoke earlier too about some technology that helps with sizing, because that is one of the biggest challenges in e-commerce, is sizing. And as it relates to that is the number of returns and how costly returns are to manage. So what technology do you see that you've either used that's helped you, or that you see coming online in the future, but maybe it's not quite there yet? Or what are your thoughts on tools that people can use at home when they're shopping online to try to narrow down that sizing a little bit better?
Yeah, that's a great question. And honestly, I've worked with probably 5 different fit applications and softwares to try and figure this out. The one thing that remains constant in all the ones I've seen is it's not usually the software's fault, it's the customer's fault. I've noticed something in sizing in general, especially in menswear. Like when you look at and let's just say slacks, for example, when I first started working in the industry, people would come in and tell me they were a 36 slack, but that's because they were a 36 in jeans, and that jean size was way off because there's vanity sizing in the jean industry. And so all of a sudden, when they're really a 36, their 36 measurement, they really are wearing 32s or 34s. And so that vanity sizing creeps into their mindset. And so one thing we've noticed is even if the software tells them, oh, they should be 8, but they think, no, I'm a 36, every pant in my closet's a 36. So they'll still size down to the 36. And then they put it on, and then it's all of a sudden, oh man, that didn't work, and they want to send it back, and we want to, you get process those returns. So that's something that we're trying to solve now, is trying to figure out, find a company that can help us maybe help people visualize it. So we have had a couple that have done more like 3D modeling of what this would look like on you if your body type is this way. And we haven't gotten far enough into that one to have a really hard evidence on how that's going to work. We've had a couple different companies pitch us on that. So yeah, that's been our struggle, is honestly, even if the softwares have good size recommendations for our customers, the customers don't believe it because they're used to the vanity sizing in the jean industry. So they always undervalue. Everybody thinks they're skinnier than they are, and everybody thinks they have bigger feet than they do. That's what we've noticed in the industry. And you have to try and combat that. And if you just keep playing to it, sometimes it can make it worse too. So we've tried to find that balance. And we're honestly, through the e-commerce side, we just haven't found it fully yet, just to be completely transparent there.
Yeah, and that's very interesting, because usually with these emerging technologies, the solution is the improvement of the technology. But in this case, there's never going to be a solution for what I really like, how you call that vanity sizing. I've never heard that before.
Yep.
But that's a good way to.
If you think about it, if you were buying jeans and you're from one company, you're a 36, and one company, you're a 38, and everything else is equal, you're always going to pick the one that makes you feel skinnier. And so that's why they played that into the market. And so it's obviously great for them, but it's hurt us overall, because especially with suits, because you do so many measurement based things, it's so hard to actually play with that vanity sizing, because all of a sudden, once you do that, then you mess up everything else in the industry. And so trying to play to that has been a tightrope to try and make sure we're playing as much to that to decrease returns, but not enough to it that it hurts everything else in our business.
Yeah. So with that challenge, it sounds like the solution, from what you described earlier, is not coming too soon on the horizon. It might be more to use products for the e-commerce side of your business that lend themselves to easier sizing and fewer returns. Is that what you're doing?
And that's what we've done. That's why we acquired Railtech over the summer. It was like, okay, maybe suits is one that, yes, let's keep trying to find solutions. Let's always keep it in the back of our minds is, let's find this way. But instead, let's promote products that have a much better return rate. And so that's why we acquired Railtech belts. That's one of the things we're pushing with some of our shirts, where we've changed some of the features in our shirts to try and make it, hey, those are products that we can definitely go to market and really push on the e-commerce side. And all of that has come to fruition. We've finally got all those products rolling over the last couple of months, and we're really excited over the Black Friday, Cyber Monday, and over the next few months to really get into that and really push our e-commerce side. Because really, I think I mentioned this to you in our earlier conversation, but we're really like 90% brick and mortar and 10% e-commerce. We want to keep the brick and mortar where it is, but increase that e-commerce side. We really feel like there's a big opportunity there for us.
Yeah, and we're definitely heading into e-commerce shopping season here.
Yep.
I'm seeing it on TV already, and we're still a week or two from Thanksgiving.
Yep, we're excited. We're excited for that, and really learn more on that e-commerce side, because honestly, it is something that we've done for a long time, but we're excited to get into it without having to worry about the suit side as much.
Yeah. How about any other technologies that you're using on the e-commerce side? It sounds like you lean pretty heavily on Shopify, and you're running your brick and mortar through that tool, through Shopify as well. Do you want to talk a little bit about how that e-commerce and brick and mortar blends a little bit for you and how you're making that work?
Yeah, Shopify, we actually were one of the earlier companies to adopt Shopify point of sale. So we actually used QuickBooks point of sale way back in the early years, and they were going to discontinue it. There was a couple things happening when we were expanding stores. The integrations between QuickBooks and Shopify were difficult. So we would show inventory in our brick and mortar stores, but it was either showing availability when there wasn't available or not showing it when it was. A lot of times through Shopify, and we just decided, hey, let's make the jump. So we jumped to Shopify point of sale back in, would have been 2021 is we made that jump, and we decided that it was going to be worth it. And it's been awesome, honestly, to be able to have all the things under one software. The inventory management's in one place. We can be omni-channel. It can be the same inventory that's in the store can get shipped from there as an e-commerce order, but also we can have a warehouse. It's just been really nice to be able to have everything in one place instead of having to try to keep it in multiple different places and keep the integrations working. So
yeah, very important to have that inventory update in real time or as close to it as you can.
Yep. And honestly, with as many SKUs as we've had, one technology we've adopted over the last couple of years is RFID scanning. So we actually have our factories tag almost, so our shirts and our suits, which are our most skewed items in our business. And so we have RFID scanners, and we can do an inventory daily if we wanted to keep inventory up to date, just because there are so many SKUs. You have to stay on top of that inventory. It can't be something like where you just have a medium of this size and you can be thousands deep. You have to keep stuff pretty low for that cash reasons that we talked about earlier. And so using RFID has been a really big help to help us keep our inventory maybe a little slimmer, to feel confident in our inventory numbers.
Yeah, you have to know you have it, and you have to know where it is.
Yep.
So you can grab it.
Yep.
All right, that brings us up to speed where you're at today. Let's talk a little bit about the future and what the plans are. The e-commerce market today is about $6 trillion in online sales. By 2027, that's expected to be $8 trillion, which is a massive increase. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are for the future of selling online. It sounds like you're committed to expanding your e-commerce side. Is that where you see a lot of the growth in the future? Or you're also expanding the brick and mortar locations? What are your thoughts on that massive amount? Currently, all retail sales worldwide, 20% of all sales are e-commerce, all retail. So that's amazing. If you think about all the brick and mortar out there, 20%. So that's going to have to increase to go from 6 to 8 trillion. So what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, and I see that in our company. We're wanting to move that way because there's lots of challenges of e-commerce, but one of the amazing things about e-commerce is you can expand without having to add too many fixed costs on top of that. And that's something where we wanted to get our fixed cost to a spot where we could leverage that with our brick and mortar spots. But now we have enough locations in our Utah market that we're at that now we can expand outside of Utah and really push the e-commerce side. So we really are excited. And that those numbers you shared are even more exciting to me as we've been looking at that opportunity, because we really do feel like there are a lot of types of products that we haven't been pushing online that really can do well through the e-commerce channels. And we are really banking on and then having that be a big part of our future to help us with cash flow. Like I mentioned earlier, some of that struggle, I really think e-commerce is a really good way to help with cash flow because you do have such limited fixed costs. But yeah, honestly, that's where we're at. We're really excited about the future of e-commerce. So we feel like that's the biggest spot where we haven't exploited all the opportunities yet. And we feel like we can get there.
Yeah, big opportunities for sure coming in the future. Okay, how about any tips, tricks, things that you'd have for any of our listeners that are maybe ready to get into e-commerce or into business in general? Any advice that you have for people that are just getting into it? When I think about how many sellers there are, I think about eBay as an example. eBay is more individual sellers versus stores, and there's 20 million sellers on eBay, which is quite a lot. So there are a lot of people out there that just have some things they want to sell. They're maybe selling here, selling there, looking to start a business. Any advice for those folks?
Yeah. And honestly, with my specific experience in my store, it's maybe not as pertinent to this specific question just because I did come into a company that was already started. But in my studies at BYU, being an entrepreneurship major, one thing we talked about a lot is failing fast and failing quick. So there's going to be lots of failures. And instead of putting yourself into a situation where you are putting all kinds of money into something and then having a failure happen, is failing cheap, failing fast, and failing quick. And so that's the beauty of e-commerce is you can start a website for relatively really inexpensive. You can get a product at the start of it and try and test that. And then once you have it, then you can start building things out. And I think that's one of the beauties of e-commerce that has changed the market in so many different ways, is now people can get proof of concepts with real customers rather than having to go survey and ask people. hey, would you buy this? And I think a lot of those, like you said, those sellers that are on eBay, they're getting a proof of concept. So now maybe it's time to take that next step and proof the concept a little bit more. Go put it in a spot where now you can actually put that out there, and you maybe have to take on a little more inventory, but keep growing. And if you've proved that concept, now it's time to start scaling that and moving that forward. And I think that's a really good opportunity.
Yeah, very good advice. And you're going to have some, I think, hits and some misses. And the idea there is learn quickly and move on and keep plowing forward.
Yep.
All right, Braiden, thanks very much for sharing that story with us. And as we wrap up, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit more about where you're at, locations-wise, a little bit about the business, how they can find you, find more about you, or find you online.
Yeah. So we have locations. I'm located in Utah. We have locations in Orem, which is right next to Provo, Riverton, Draper, and Bountiful. So we have four brick and mortar locations. And then we have our website is odionmenswear.com. It's Odion is how Odion is spelled. And yeah, that's basically where you can find us. And we're located especially in Utah right now. That's where our focus is. But like I said, the e-commerce we're trying to push that outside of Utah as we go forward. So.
All right. Thanks again, Brandon. And thanks to everyone watching and listening today. And we will see you all next time. Bye.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Focal Insights Podcast. If you like this episode, go ahead and hit the subscribe button so you can be alerted of new episodes. See you next time.